A C# program is organized into three different parts: a file, a project, and a solution. This can be a little confusing for beginners, but it's pretty straightforward. A file is just a single file that contains code, just like a Word document with your history essay. A project is a collection of files that are all related to each other, so maybe that's like a folder with all the Word documents for your history class. And a solution is a collection of projects that are all related to each other. That would be the USB drive that has all the folders for all of your classes. Just make sure you don't lose it, because there's no way your history teacher believes that's what happened. We're going to make a solution for each assignment, like the Module 4 programming assignments, for example, and then within that we'll have a project for each program we write. Many of my assignments have Part A and Part B, so those will be our projects within the Module 4 programming assignment solution. The way you create your solution and projects will depend on what IDE you're using. For this video, I'm using JetBrains Rider on a Mac, but everything will be similar on the Windows or Linux versions of the program. Before we create our first program in Rider, we should decide where we're going to save our work and create a folder for it. The location doesn't have any impact on me when I grade it. You're going to be zipping up your files and submitting them, so it won't matter to me where they were on your computer. Of course, you do need to be able to find them later. My suggestion is to make a folder in your Documents directory called CIS 162AD or whatever class you're in, and keep all your work in there. Wherever you put it, make sure you back it up regularly, and please don't save all your work on a USB drive. I always feel bad when students lose them, but me feeling bad doesn't really help you with all the zeros you're going to get. And now we're ready to create our solution in Rider. If you have this kind of start screen, you'll have a new solution button, and you can just click that. If you don't have that screen, just go to the File menu and choose New Solution. There are different types of projects we can create, so we want to make sure we choose Console. Later in the course, we'll check out some of the other options. Once we've selected that console project type, it's time to think about that solution project file structure that we looked at earlier. Remember that the solution name is where it's okay to talk about the assignment you're working on, so Module 4 programming assignment or something like that. You're probably working on the Module 1 labs right now, so I'm going to use that as my example. And as I type, notice that it's setting the project name to the same thing. That's not really what we want. Remember that the project name is kind of the program itself, and so that needs to describe what this program does. If I'm writing a program that calculates the area of a circle, for example, the project name might be something like Circle Area Calculator. That's kind of a long name, but it is descriptive and lets me know what this program does. I'll call this one First Program. The solution directory is where we want to save this work. And so here's where I'm going to go browse and select that folder that I created a moment ago. The target framework should be whatever version of .NET you installed when you were getting started, and it might not match what you see on my screen now. But you do need to make sure that you have the language set as C#, since there are some other options. We'll revisit this checkbox that says do not use top-level statements in a little bit. But for now, I can just go ahead and click through to create my project, and I will adjust my window a little bit to make it easier to see. By tradition, the first program we write in a new language is code that outputs the message "Hello World." So it gives us a template that actually starts with that. I'm going to go ahead and delete all that so we can start from a clean slate. To produce output, I'm going to use something called the write method. The statement to use that begins with the word console, followed by a period, and then the word write. The first lesson in programming is that details matter. Everything has to be spelled correctly, and everything is case sensitive. So console has to be spelled with a capital C, and write has to be spelled with a capital W. Rider uses some color coding on words that it recognizes, so that can be a hint if I'm typing something incorrectly. And if it does recognize a mistake, it will underline it in red. In order for the write method to output something, it has to know what we want it to output. To give it that information, we put parentheses on the end. In the parentheses, we can put quotation marks and then type the message we want to display, so hello C# in the quotes. Again, details matter. The message has to have quotes on both sides, and the parentheses have to be there. A C# statement ends with a semicolon, a lot like a period at the end of a sentence. If I'm missing that, I'll have a little red underline. If I try to run it at this point by clicking the green Start button up in the top right, I'm going to get a panel at the bottom that explains my error, or at least attempts to explain my error, and it will not run. So I can go add my missing semicolon and click that button again, and now it should work. In that panel at the bottom, I get some messaging, but my output is there in the middle, hello C#. And so this program is working. I guess this really isn't a very impressive program, but if you're new to coding, this is kind of a big deal. You've now created your first computer program. Let's see a couple other things we can do with this code. I can add another line with a different message, so I'll put another console.write line. I'll run the program again, and now I see both messages in the output window, but notice that the messages are kind of jammed together on the same line. The write method doesn't hit enter at the end of a line. The cursor just waits until we output more. Since we often want to output a message and then move on to the next line, there's another method called writeLine. It works the same way, so I'll just change that write to writeLine and run it again. Something else we need to know right away is how to use code comments. Comments are notes that we put in our source code for the people who are looking at it. They get ignored by the compiler, so we can put whatever we want in them and it won't affect the program. To write a comment on one line, just put 2 slashes. Rider shades it green to show that it recognizes it's a comment, and the rest of that line just gets skipped. If I put it at the end of a line of code, then the compiler and at runtime, it will look at everything up to those slashes, but it will ignore everything after the slashes. If you want to write a comment that uses more than one line, you can indicate that with a slash and an asterisk or star, and then you end it with an asterisk and a slash. We always put a multi-line comment, or what I call a comment block, at the top of our program to provide some information about what it is and what it does. When you're writing a program for an assignment, I have a very specific format for that, and you should check the directions to see what it is. But even outside a class, the best practice is to describe the program a little. So I'll add a simple little comment block up here. And now I just want to run this again to make sure those comments haven't messed anything up. Alright, so our first program is done. But many assignments in my class require 2 separate programs, so we need to know how to correctly add a project to this solution. And there's another thing I kind of mentioned but that we need to come back to, this idea of top-level statements. A program in C# is actually a little more complicated than this first example we created. A program has to have something called a class, and that class has to have a method, and that's where the program starts running. In order to make it easier, we can use top-level statements, and then the compiler will create all that other stuff for us. To see how that works, let's go ahead and create another program. This one is going to be closely related to the one I've already created. It's part of the same assignment for my class. So I should add the new project to my existing solution. If I go over here to the Solution Explorer and I right-click on the solution name up at the top, one of the options is Add, and from there I can select New Project. This is going to take me back to that familiar window, but notice that it's not asking for a solution name because it knows we're putting this in my existing solution. And remember that our project name should be descriptive, even though this might be Module 1 Part B, I want to give it a name that describes what it does. I'm going to call this Song Lyrics, and the project directory should be all set because it's going to go inside that solution folder. The option we didn't look at before is this checkbox for Do Not Use Top-Level Statements. We'll go ahead and check this now. Pay attention to this because now it will be set as the default the next time you create a new solution, and you might want to uncheck it the next time around. After Rider creates that project, you're going to see it over here in our Solution Explorer, and I can expand that to see the files. And notice that we do have a tabbed interface here, so I can click the tabs to flip back and forth between my 2 programs. This one looks a little more complicated than what we did before. We'll take a look at that in a second, but first I don't want to forget my comment block at the top. And now let's look at this program style. You can see that we've got some other things here, and the most important one is the main method, this line 11. Main is the entry point for our program. When a C# program is going to run, it looks for the main method, and that's where it begins. There are curly braces underneath it that denote where that method starts and ends, so whatever we put in between there is going to be what executes. And you can see that the hello world default is in there. So this is really not a big deal. As long as I make sure I'm between those two curly braces, my code is going to be exactly the same as it was with top-level statements. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this template code, and to save us time, I'll just copy and paste my song lyrics code. And now I'll go run this. But what happens is that it's still running that first program that I made. My solution has two projects now, and so it needs to know which one we're trying to run. If I right-click on the song lyrics project, one of the choices is to run that project, and that gets us going again. Once I've done that once and Rider recognizes that it's a separate program, there's a little drop-down next to the Start button that I can use to select whichever one I want to execute. And our tabbed user interface lets me look at the code very quickly back and forth and work on whichever one I want. There's no significant difference between these two different ways of creating our program, and as far as I'm concerned, you can use either one. What I expect is that most students are probably going to use the top-level statements because it's a little less confusing and you just jump in and start coding. But later in the course, we'll want to organize our own code into classes and methods, so we'll be seeing more of that older style down the road. And the truth is, this is still a pretty new feature for C#, so most of the examples that you see out there in videos and books and websites still use this main method approach, and I want you to be able to make sense of those examples without getting confused. And with that, both of these programs are now working, and I can go off and zip these up to be submitted, which we'll see in another video.